I appreciate you all coming to this. So my name is Melissa Nysewander, and I lead a big team of data scientists at Fidelity Investments. And so what I do during my day job, I don't do a lot of hands-on stuff anymore, but what I do about 50% of the time is I think about AI governance, and I think about how at Fidelity we're making sure that all of the AI work that we do aligns with what we want to be doing as a company. So I appreciate you coming out. It is not the sexiest of topics, but I have a whole ton of content to cover in about 30 minutes. So bear with me on this. Also, I can't get the clicker to go, so I'm just gonna, there we go. Okay, the most boring definition. AI governance is fundamentally the frameworks, policies, and processes that guide the use of AI. So why is this important? Why are we all here? It's because AI is expanding across industries. More and more companies are figuring out how to use AI, whether it's classic machine learning or more generative AI techniques. We're figuring out how to use AI in our business models to develop better products, to develop better services. And Gen AI is a multiplier to that expansion. Companies that previously had never been thinking about AI, because let's say in the past, you had to have like these data scientists to build the models, or the AI engineers to build the models to put in production. But now with generative AI, it's really democratized everything, and I absolutely love that. But it's allowing more and more companies to get in, and while they might be thinking about all the cool ways they can use AI, they might not be thinking about all the ways that AI can go wrong. So that's why I'm here. That's what I wanted to talk about. And I will say for folks who were here this morning, you might have seen the talk where somebody went and built a resume screener using AI in one of the morning sessions. And I saw that, and I think that really well illustrates why I'm here. Because you can do that, yes. But if you go and ask an LLM, ask a Microsoft I actually did this during the break. If you ask Microsoft Copilot to give you the picture of what 10 software developers looks like, 9 out of those 10 was a tall, lanky white guy with black hair and a beard. So if you have a resume screening model that's looking for software developers, you have to be really careful about that. That not only has ethical issues, if somebody gets denied a job and they realize it's because you use this resume screener, they could sue you. So there are real laws around this and just ethical issues. So that, I think, really well illustrated the best point of why we're here. So I am going to talk about 4 cautionary tales in the AI space that illustrate the types of risk that we need to be thinking about. The first one is from Zillow. So Zillow, in 2018, Zillow started this new offering. It was called Zillow Offers. And what it was a cash offer to any homeowner that wanted to sell their house. Now, I have to imagine, we probably have all gone to Zillow and checked, like, what is the fair market value of our house? The Z estimate or Zestimate or whatever that is. Zillow really believed in their estimates, and they used what they thought was the fair market value to basically give cash offers where they thought that they were making some money. So 2018, they started this. In 2021, they closed the program. They had bought 22,000 houses from people. They had lost hundreds of millions of dollars. And in 2021, when they closed it, they had to lay off 25% of their workforce. What happened here? This is a really great example of the financial risk that comes, or the business risk, strategic business risks that can come by misusing AI. Fundamentally, what their issue was at Zillow, they trusted their AI a little bit too much. And okay, so it was 2018 to 2021, and yes, there was COVID, and markets changed completely. There were labor shortages, absolutely. But just 10 years before, we also had the housing bubble. So what we need to, you need to have a lot of skepticism. You need to really think, what's the worst thing that can happen with the AI that I'm using? And here, there was broad strategic risks that they did not factor in. They very much trusted that their estimates were that accurate. That being said, there is sort of a more specific model accuracy that every AI model is probabilistic in some way. No AI model is 100% accurate. You always have to figure that in to when you're thinking about, like, well, what's the cost of an error? What's the cost of that? That translates directly into financial risk as well. And then third, there is just essentially poor investments. You know, we're 3 years into this AI hype cycle, and 3 years ago, every AI project was getting approved. Every AI project was getting funded. And now execs are going back and saying, well, what's my ROI? AI development, AI software development is a different beast than traditional software development, and you have to understand those differences in order to make a good return on your investments. And another really good example is sort of goes into the last example, this SR 11-7. This is a framework that came out of the 2007 housing bubble and market crisis there. So what happened there was you basically had these sort of shady credit lending models that caused this housing bubble, that caused this market crisis. And so their regulations had come out about that. So even if you're not in a financial company, this is a really great place. That regulation is a really good framework for starting to think about how you deal with financial risk. In 2019, Science published an article that talked about an algorithm that Optum Health had put out there. It was being used for 200 million patients, and fundamentally what it did was it misjudged what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to assess which patients are higher versus lower risk. And for those patients that were high risk, what it was doing was saying that, oh, we need to provide these people higher, like more nursing, more care, more therapy to make sure they don't have a catastrophic event. But there are fundamental systematic differences in the ways that blacks and whites access healthcare. And the people that created this model didn't understand that. And so even though they didn't have ethnicity or gender or anything in their model, those factors did come out. And so what they did was basically underestimate the amount of care that black people needed. And so what was the fundamental problem there? It was sort of these issues with hidden biases, these hidden correlations in the data. Where people that create these models, they're not necessarily saying, I'm going to create an unethical model that's biased. Nobody's thinking that. People don't even usually have these types of these values in their model as training features. But even if you don't have them in there are hidden correlations in the data. And in that example, there just happen to be hidden correlations between healthcare spending and race. Robust training data. Now, I will say the Optum Health example did have robust training data. It had a broad amount of data. That wasn't the issue, but it does go without saying that you need to have a broad representation of users in your training data set. And I think one example of that is there was a lot of racial bias in facial recognition technologies early on. Transparency and explainability. For this, I'd say, for especially risky models, it's often good to start with the premise of you want to build a model that is transparent, that you understand, that you can kind of look at the weights, look at the factors, and understand what's going on in there. Even if you can't do that, even if it's better to have a more accurate model, you still want to spend some time on the back end looking at your model to really understand what's going on in there. And then finally, a lot of times I see discussions about how AI is doing these awful things. But to be honest, I think that a lot of times AI just follows the business ethics of the company. So for a health insurance company, if a health insurance company is denying claims that a doctor has made for a patient, is it the AI's fault? Or is it the fact that it is a company? If a human made that decision, would it be any better? It's not AI, it's the ethics, it's the business model of the company that we're talking about. This was in 2019. Facebook was fined $5 billion for violations of data user privacy. There was, I have many soapboxes, and I have a big soapbox about social media. But what it did was Facebook was using private user data, and they weren't really telling them, but they were training. What Facebook is it's a big AI model to personalize somebody's experience. It is to personalize it so that it makes you addicted to the platform so that you'll go to it and you'll spend all of your time and attention on the platform and then buy things that the platform asks you to buy. So there's issues around ethics there too. But fundamentally what was here was that people didn't realize that Facebook was using their data to do all of these things. So fundamentally, data privacy and security. I mean, AI folks care about data privacy and security a lot because we use data a lot to build our AI models. But fundamentally, this is no different than any other use of data. So here, what was happening with Facebook was really that they needed to understand, they needed to be clear. They needed to tell people, yes, we're using your data for these things. Or you can opt out. You can opt out and not use your data for these things. All the safeguards, if you're a Gen X like me and on Facebook some, then you all know that there's ways to go in and protect your data and say, oh, you don't want to do this or you will do that. That wasn't always the case. But there's other things in the data space. And again, this doesn't really have to do with AI, but there's secure data practices, things like the philosophy of only being able to access exactly what you need. Or like making sure that you have encryption or anonymization, making sure that you're following good data hygiene practices. There is one, adversarial testing. This is actually an AI thing. So in adversarial testing, I think there's a talk about it later that I'm really excited to go to. So in a Gen AI system, you can do prompt injecting to try to get the system to do things that it wouldn't normally do. So hackers or fraudsters can take advantage of that. Or in a normal system, if you have, say, if you're scoring and you have data coming in through an API, fraudsters can come in and try to hack the APIs behind the AI models. And again, you hear a lot about data regulations, about GDPR and CCPA in the AI space. Again, it's not that they're AI specific, but AI brings new dimensions of the ways that we can screw up these regulations. In 2024, the EU passed the biggest, most broad sweeping AI regulations that have been passed by a major government. Amazon was caught up in there pretty much for similar reasons that I talked about with Facebook. They were using user data to target people for ads. And apparently, it went against a court in Luxembourg found that they were in violation of the new EU AI Act, and they were fined 750 million euros for that. So compliance is not a new risk, and it's not really a new thing. It's just a way. I guess it's a new risk for a company if you don't think about it. But you do need to all understand, if you are doing AI, there are regulations around AI. There are things that we need to make sure we're following. And so compliance, having a compliance function that looks into these things, they're the ones that keep us honest. So what did Amazon, what was the problem there? Well, they were doing business in the EU, and so there were new legal requirements there. Now, The governments have started, like I mentioned before with the SR 11-7 that came out of the financial crisis. Governments are thinking about it as a tiered risk approach. The riskiest things are the things that need to be governed more closely. The less risky things, not as much. So we do need to think about risk. And I do want to say, so there has been a lot of talk about regulations of AI in the US as well, and across, other companies are adopting this as well. One of the main topics that we talk about is like, are you regulating the AI model itself? Or are you regulating the use of the AI? For AI practitioners like me and like us, we're probably, I don't want to speak for everybody, but for me, I think that AI to me is neither good nor bad. There is no, I don't give a fundamental judgment to the AI, but it's the usage of AI. And so I know there's been a lot of debate out there to sort of craft these new regulations. And while I said the EU has been on it, in the US we have the Algorithmic Accountability Act. That was proposed under Biden. It was starting to gain momentum. I have a feeling there won't be much movement on it for the next 4 years. But if you want to understand sort of where we might be headed, that's something that you all can go and look into. Okay. Sorry, I started a little bit late, so I might go a little bit over. I wanted to talk about sort of why we are here. What are the risks that we're talking about? Here, I'm going to get into the even more boring part, actually creating a function. This is actually it's the boring part, but this is the meaty part. So really, so before we get into that, technically what it takes, I feel like this is step 0. You need to create an AI strategy. And you need to think what are you going to do with the AI? What problems, what business problems are you going to solve? What is the value you're going to bring with AI? I see a lot of folks that are well, I want to use AI to do X. That's not the way you start your problem. You start with a business problem and you think, what are the ways that I can solve this? AI might be one of those ways. So think about what is your focus areas? What are your people? Do you have the right talent? Do you have the right organizations to deliver on your AI strategy? What's your approach? Will you build? Will you buy? Will you partner? I'll say a lot of companies have been building their own things. With generative AI, there's a lot of democratization in the AI space, and I think we need to expand how we're buying, expand how we're partnering. Infrastructure, do we have the right data, the right platforms? We can't do anything without having these systems for us to work in. And then finally, I think part of the whole AI strategy is you have to think, well, how am I going to govern this? How am I going to track the AI work and make sure that I have the right assets and I track those assets? So what level of investment do you need in this space? The level of investment you need in this space basically depends on your level of risk. So I would say on the left, so things like spell check, things like Grammarly, these are really low risk things. If you get it wrong, maybe your product won't work very well and somebody will just ignore the suggestion, but fundamentally it's not super risky. So maybe you don't need as huge of an investment in a model risk management function or something like that. On the right-hand side, the high risk, think of that like what I talked about earlier, with the financial markets, credit scoring models. If you are lending money to people and you use an AI model, you need to make sure that that is right, not only for financial risk, for ethical risk, for all of these things. And so credit scoring is something that really does require the highest levels of AI governance. Something in the middle like fraud detection, or I think of the example of if we're building a model to understand who might be interested in a product and we put this picture or that picture up there, well, it's probably not a big deal. We still need to make sure, we still need to make sure that we are not biased, that we're providing value. So even in the middle column, you still want to have some sort of effort in making sure you're not biased in your approach in some way. And then the organization. So executing on AI governance requires this cross-functional organization. So the two on the left here, the financial risk and the ethics and bias. Financial risk, I mean, maybe you have a finance function, you have business people, you have AI experts and data scientists that can help peer review these models. So you can make sure you don't do those things like Zillow did, or like happened in the financial crash. Ethics and bias, you probably don't have an AI ethics function. And to have an AI ethics function, you do actually need people who are able to evaluate these models statistically to understand the biases in there. So that does require some sort of, again, a peer review. But security and privacy, I hope you already have functions that work with the data for cybersecurity purposes or data privacy. You should already have that sort of function. Or a compliance function, some sort of legal entity that makes sure that you are adhering to laws. You know, companies will have the two sort of functions on the right-hand side. And so, you know, I think a lot about the evolution of AI and the evolution of AI at companies. I think what's the direction that we're going, it's not to create these new sort of like organizations, but instead enable existing organizations to expand their scope and say, okay, well, we have a compliance function. Let's make sure that compliance function also understands AI well enough to be able to help us out and ensure that we're complying with regulations. So pinpoint the stakeholders in your organizations that would best correspond to these, start working with them. And then execution. Like, this is the most tangible thing. So fundamentally, to execute on this, you first need to have an inventory of all of your AI assets. Whether or not you call it use cases or you call it models, you have to track all this information. You have to gather all this information so that you can answer all these questions going on down the road. So you have to have this sort of inventory of the AI work that you're doing. Risk comes next. Again, you're probably going to capture a lot of this information when you put in there, but you need a risk assessment framework. You need to think, what are the fundamental risks? What are you as a business? And it depends on the business. What are you as a business are interested in accepting the risks of? Some companies are very conservative. Other companies might not be as much. So you just have to sort of understand your tolerances. Third, you have to actually create the organizations. These are the organizations. It might be a committee that reviews things. It might be a new AI ethics team. It might be a lot of different things. But you have to actually physically create the governance organizations and figure out where they're going to sit, where it makes most sense for them to sit within your group. It probably doesn't make sense for them to sit with the people that are building things. And it's best to not have an adversarial relationship between the builders and the governors, but you do need to have, they do kind of need to be separate, but partners. And then a platform, a governance platform. This is a place where you can track the models through their life cycle, understand like, well, what stage is it at? What do you need? Again, these platforms are broader than just sort of the initial intake. It helps you track along the way. And you can Google, there's a lot of companies out there that are developing and have governance platforms out there that people can use. At Fidelity, we have basically kind of have our own homegrown one. And then 5, the lifecycle monitoring. So you build this thing, you build this new AI asset, you put it out there, and then what happens to it? Once in AI development, you put it out there, but it's unpredictable in production. You might give it new data. Somebody might be interacting with it in ways that you didn't expect. So you need to understand how it's performing as it goes on. And then training and communication. All of this stuff is wonderful, but again, one of the beautiful things about generative AI is that it is democratizing AI. So more and more groups at your companies will be using AI in these ways. They all have to understand all of the governance that they have to follow along the way. Because you don't want to be stuck there at the end saying, sorry, you shouldn't have ever done that. You spent 6 months doing that. We need to everybody needs to understand the processes that goes along. And then finally, I wanted to provide some some resources for you all to go look at if you're interested more in this. So the White House AI Bill of Rights that came about, again, under the Biden administration, to look at protecting civil rights, promoting democratic values. The current administration might not do much with that. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, they have their own model risk framework. You can go look at that. There is the international ISO standards. They put out one. If you're a really risky company, you might need to look at that. And then again, I just want to plug for the Algorithm Accountability Act. So finally, I just wanted to bring us home with this quote from Stephen Hawking. AI could be the best or the worst thing ever to happen to humanity. And we are at very nascent stages of this new type of AI. And the way we set our direction now is really going to determine the answer to that question. Is it the best or is it the worst? Thank you.